Hey there, everybody. I'm Shariar, aka Persian Poppy. Thank you for tuning in. Um, I've been wanting to create this video for a while, but I wanted to make sure that Microsoft and Sony released everything that they were going to release and that I had more than enough information to make an educated decision and kind of put some information together and really kind of compare both consoles that are coming out in terms of next generation, the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. And I don't know about you guys, but the closer November gets, the more excited I get. Um, so I've been a console guy pretty much since day one, since I was old enough to have a console. I got a Nintendo, Sega Genesis, then Super Nintendo. I've always had multiple consoles. Even till just recently, I had a PS4 Pro and an Xbox One X. Obviously, there's one that I prefer, one that I like most, but as long as the budget allows and I can afford it, I want to experience all that gaming has to offer. I feel if you're a true gamer, you wouldn't shut out one console over the other. Just because, why not experience everything gaming has to offer? Why just play PlayStation or just play Xbox? Um, so yeah, talking about the Microsoft and Sony consoles is very difficult just because um, the internet is littered with PlayStation rumors. Not so much Xbox, but there's so much clickbait out there in terms of Sony's PS5 that you just feel like um, these PS fanboys are really trying to make up for some sort of inadequacy. So I really wanted to get to the bottom of this. My background in terms of schooling is, I went to college, I got a computer engineering degree, and then I went to university after that, and I got a BA in applied computing and distributed computing and information systems. So um, my background is all about electronics, hardware, and programming. So it's what I do now. It's programming is what I do now. It's my career. So I feel like I owe it to the gamers out there who are a little confused. Someone who really understands these things should bring all the information together and kind of break it down. So we're gonna talk through everything: Xbox Series X and Sony PlayStation 5. Um, so the rumors aside, one thing is for sure is that both companies and both consoles are going to deliver a resounding increase in power based on last generation. Um, the PS4 originally debuted at 1.84 teraflops, and I know talking about teraflops, people get kind of iffy, but teraflops are a very important calculation, and I'll tell you why it's a good metric. Um, so the PS4 originally came out at 1.84 teraflops, and when PlayStation did their mid-gen refresh, the PS4 Pro came out with 4.2 teraflops of power. And anybody who owns a PlayStation like me, I had the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, and it was a night and day difference in terms of the visuals and the power and everything that you were seeing. It's that those, you know I would say almost 3 teraflops in power increase really made a difference. And the PS4 Pro ran better, the games looked way better, and The developers were allowed to do a lot of things in terms of upscaling and stuff like that because the power was there and the teraflop GPU power was there. So it's very hard to say that teraflops are insignificant because a lot of the games that you see on PS4 Pro that are not 4K or native 4K and they're up resed, they're only capable of doing that because of that increase in power. So that power, that GPU power, is very important. When you think of, so Xbox originally came out with the Xbox One S that had 1.4 teraflops of power, which is less than the PS4 Pro's 1.84, and then later came out with the Xbox One X that had 6 teraflops of power, and that's the console I have now. I had the One S, I traded it in, and then I got the One X. And just like Sony's mid-gen refresh, the Xbox One X was night and day difference. Playing Forza Horizon, like a game like Forza Horizon for the first time in native 4K 60 frames per second, it was one of the most gorgeous things I've ever seen in terms of gaming. Just the way everything looked, the handling, the car was more responsive, the gaming was way better at 60 frames, and high resolution at 60 frames. It's very hard to say, visuals don't matter, especially when you're playing a racing game, because unless it's a racing sim and you're on your PC and you have your rig and you're really looking for immersiveness and feedback and all these other things, and you're not so much worried about the visuals, I get that. But when you're on a console, and I have a 75-inch 4K TV upstairs, and it's hard to justify going out and buying a $4,000, $5,000 4K TV or 8K TV and then saying visuals don't matter on the console. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't compute. You're contradicting yourself. So I feel that because PlayStation users like me never really saw that huge increase in going into native 4K and things like that, I feel like they don't care about visuals as much, but they do because games like Gran Turismo, when it was popular, not so much anymore, they looked great. It was a great looking game, and then you had God of War and things like that, and those games provide great visuals, and Spider-Man recently provided great visuals. So it's hard to say that teraflops don't matter and the visuals don't matter. I'd rather have, great gameplay, but you can't have great gameplay without high visuals and really great frame rate so that the game is smooth, responsive, and all those things. So just comparing PS4 Pro and PS4 and what that leap provided in terms of games, and then Xbox came out with the One S and the One X. Both companies proved that providing more horsepower and GPU power really does make a difference, and it's advanced gaming to a whole nother level. And now you think about full ray tracing with high visuals in the next generation, and the games are even going to get better and more responsive and smoother. And especially since I play a lot of first-person shooter and sports games, I'm looking for the visuals that make everything look realistic with high frame rate so that the responsiveness is always there. That's just me personally as a gamer. But looking at the PS5 and the Series X, Sony's come up with a console that's 5.5 times more powerful than their previous generation, and Xbox is coming out with a console that's 8.5 times more powerful than their previous iteration. one of the more interesting trends that we're going to see in this new generation is that consoles are not coming out and pretty much almost obsolete in terms of what they're providing. So, um, especially when you're comparing it to PC, PC has you've whenever a company's announced a console, you've been able to go right to PC and say, how can I build this PC to be better than this console? And you've always done that. You've always been able to do that. Soon as whatever console was released, whether it's Xbox or PlayStation, you've always been able to go, how can I build a console killer on PC? And you've always been able to do that. But for the first time in this new generation, you're seeing RDNA 2 being released in console before it gets released for PC. So it's hard to say, let me create a console killer for the next generation, because RDNA 2 is coming to console before it's coming out on PC. And based on price point, it's really hard to get something like an Xbox created at that price. If they do price it at $399 or $499, either way, there is nothing that comes close. That you can scour the world for PC parts, you'll never create anything as popular or as efficient as an Xbox Series X for that price. So it's real bang for the buck. So next generation consoles have narrowed the gap to the point where they're within they are within spitting distance of high-end graphic cards on the market. This is definitely a welcome trend because it allows hardcore PC users to consider consoles and shift the medium without compromising on visual fidelity. PC users, I'm a PC user, and it's, PC's always been better because you've always been able to swap out parts and just upgrade it and always have something that's relatively high end. But the new next gen consoles now, and I'll show you the comparison to what's out there on the market. It's now PC users going to console and not having to compromise on anything at all. Full ray tracing, direct ML. We're going to talk about all that stuff. VRS. So Microsoft did their reveal, and they were blatantly clear on everything they talked about. They allowed third-party testers like Digital Foundry to get close-ups. And they brought in all these different YouTubers to tear apart the system, put it back together, tear it apart, put it back together. Then they came onto Hot Chips and they broke the console down to the last transistor. This is a company that is very secure in their product. They know it's the best. They know it's the most powerful. Here it is. Tear it apart. Do whatever you want. You can't find issues with this. And we're going to talk about all that. So Microsoft did their reveal and they released the specs and what it looks like and everything like that. And, console looks and design is really, so it's preference. To me, it really doesn't matter what the console looks like at all. And same with third-party games. Both companies did, a next-gen reveal on games, and it's fairly preferential. It's somebody who's spent their entire in the last maybe 5 to 8 years to 10 years on a PlayStation, finishing all these achievements and things like that, and they have this history with Sony. It doesn't matter what Microsoft comes out with, because they're not going to switch over. They have all this history and the user score and all this other stuff and achievements unlocked and blah blah blah. But that person's not going to switch over to Microsoft just because they created a better product. At this point, they're just going to argue what they know. But Microsoft did their reveal. They were excruciatingly clear on everything, the specs, all this other stuff. Later on, they talked about velocity architecture and how they're optimizing everything and how efficient it is. And then PlayStation did their reveal, and it was lacking in clarity, and it's almost like they were purposely vague. And they talked about the SSD a lot, and the one thing about the SSD is you can speed up the transfer of assets and things like that, but at the end of the day, these assets have to get processed, and you have to produce it onto the screen. And because you have to do that, there's going to be a bottleneck. So unfortunately, we're gonna do like an architecture breakdown and everything like that. And when we compare the two on an architectural level and a design level and everything like that, you're gonna see a real difference. So I watched the Sony reveal and they talked about the SSD a lot. That's great. It's fast. Load ups are super fast. Xbox showed their console, Microsoft showed their console loading up and how much faster it is compared to previous generation. And it's pretty much on par. It's, a second or two difference is really not going to change anything. But the most important thing, and we're going to go back to teraflops, is Xbox came out and said our CPU is this clock, our GPU is this clock, and then Sony came out and said this is our clock, but it's variable on the CPU, and this is our clock on the GPU, but it's variable. So when Xbox talks about what their sustained teraflop number is, and sustained teraflops is very important. When you're a PC person and you want to go shop for a new GPU and you want to go buy a video card, you're going to look at what's out there on the market and what the benchmarks are and what the numbers are. And when a company like Nvidia or AMD or whatever it is, when they refer to power and teraflops and things like that, they talk about the sustained number. So let's say, for example, the Radeon 5700 XT has a sustained 9.98 teraflops. That's their sustained number. They're not saying, based on these conditions and this and this and this overclocking, we can peak out at this. So PS5 did their reveal, and they talked about our CPU maxes out at this clock and our video card maxes out at this clock, and this is our peak number, 10 teraflops, 10.3 teraflops. And it's great that you can peak at something, but what's your sustained number? And nobody knows what that sustained number is. Now, one person has an idea. When the clock speed slows down, what it slows down to? Is it slowing down to 2 gigahertz from 2.23 on the GPU? Or is it going way down to 1.5? Nobody knows. And Sony won't, and no one's asking Sony because they're afraid. They're afraid to ask because they don't know what the response is going to be. So here's the most important thing. The Xbox Series X sustained teraflops, 12.1. PS5 says we peak out at 10.3. So let's get into that. So when it comes to teraflops is a very commonly used metric, and it refers to maximum computational throughput. Theoretically, this allows you to see the maximum potential of a GPU when it's used in its entirety. So teraflops very important. Usually you calculate it by taking the clock speed, multiplying by 2, multiplying by stream processors over 1,000. Now, it's very important when you're looking at teraflops, the first variable in the equation is clock speed. If I don't know what the clock speed is, I can't calculate teraflops. Yeah, I can give you some theoretical maximum output of 10.3, but what is your sustained teraflop number? So in the case of next gen consoles, stream processors are not something that is referred to anymore when calculating teraflops. With the RDNA technology, we refer to control units. That's what RDNA uses, and this is another thing that's very important. Even though Xbox is using a 1.825 gigahertz clock on their GPU, they have 52 control units. And PS5 has 36. So that makes a difference when calculating teraflops. And in this case, the teraflop calculation becomes clock speed multiplied by 2, multiplied by control units, multiplied by 64 over 1,000. So when we look at the specs Microsoft has released, we can absolutely trust this number of 12.1 teraflops because we know control units, we know a stable clock for the GPU, CPU, and we know that it's fabricated on TSMC 7 nanometer enhanced technology or N7P process, which gives us further information, and I'm going to talk about that as well. So we can absolutely trust 12.1472 teraflops when we take the 1.825 clock, multiplied by 2, multiplied by 52, multiplied by 64 over 1,000. So I did refer to, in the industry, when people refer to teraflops, they're always talking about a sustained number, not a peak number. So let's talk about architecture a little bit. So TSMC is offering a couple of different processes on how to create a 7 nanometer node, and only one of them can sustain a 2.23 gigahertz clock. So PS5 is said to be running the GPU at 2.3 gigahertz, but it's variable. So to me, I think their maximum clock is 1.95 gigahertz, and I'll tell you where I get that number from. So TSMC is offering a couple of different ways to create these 7 nanometer nodes, and there's the 7 nanometer enhanced, which is N7P. Xbox Series X is using that. And then there's the 7 nanometer plus, which is the N7 plus. And the big difference is the 7 nanometer enhanced process uses DUV, and the 7 nanometer plus uses EUV. And this is the process that allows you to run a GPU at 2.23. Now, how do we know which one is using what? So with Microsoft's product, we know that they're using 7 nanometer enhanced N7P. And when we see, so here are the arguments against PlayStation 5 using this more enhanced version, the more expensive version of the 7 nanometer technology, and why it's not running at 2.23. One, if they're using the 7 nanometer enhanced technology to process to create these nodes, they would be using it on the GPU and the CPU. they wouldn't just use the 7 nanometer enhanced on the GPU and not use it on the CPU. They would use they would use the same process on both. But how we know that's not the case is because PlayStation's CPU at 3.5 gigahertz is lower than Xbox's CPU running at 3.8 gigahertz. So Xbox is using um, one step down, N7P, and they're at 3.8 gigahertz. And PlayStation is saying that they're using the N7 Plus process, but they can only run at 3.5, which is which doesn't really make sense. Um, and RDNA, so AMD's RDNA GPUs like the 5700 XT can only boost up to 1.95 gigahertz. This is the number that I referred to before. But Sony is claiming they can boost up to 2.23 gigahertz. I don't think they could do that. I think that's why they say variable clock, because this way they don't have to prove to you that 2.23 gigahertz is, they probably don't ever run at that frequency. When AMD's RDNA GPU like 5700 XT can only boost to a maximum of 1.95 gigahertz, this is why you start hearing things online that the sustained clock for PlayStation 5 is 2 gigahertz because of this 1.95 number. And these are all using, the other process of creating their architecture. So Microsoft is hitting a higher CPU number, but PlayStation 5 can't hit it, but they claim that their GPU can, and it means that you're taking a 1.8 or 1.95 GPU, and every once in a while you're boosting it because you're hitting a wall when it comes to your power. The things that you want to accomplish, you can't accomplish, so you have to boost it every once in a while. And that means that PS5 is going to hit their thermal and power envelope almost all the time on the PS5, and then they're going to have to slow things down to cool it down. And right there, you have that makes you one of the most inefficient consoles, because once you overclock something, that is a very inefficient way to run a PC, and it always has a downfall. And then we'll talk about all these things. So let's say, for argument's sake, that we take Sony at their word, and they created a console based on the N7 Plus process. It still doesn't change the fact that the CPU is underclocked, and they are pushing their thermal and power envelope, avoiding any benefits of this N7 Plus technology. This means that things are going to get ugly for developers, as they cannot rely on all the CPU and GPU power, like the way Microsoft's Xbox is providing all this power all the time. They have a sustained clock, so developers are always getting this constant power, and it's sustained. And meanwhile, developers working for the PS5 are going to see degradation in power and speed, and it's always going to be in flux. It's always going to be in flux. PlayStation 5 is not going to claim 2.23 gigahertz on their GPU and then always run at 1.8 or 1.85 or 1.9 or 1.95. It's going to be a flux, because their variable frequency just shows that they're not powerful enough to do what they want to do. And if you look at their, let's say you take something simple like their GPU, let's say they're claiming 2.3 gigahertz. If you just take a 2 gigahertz number and you take the 36 control units and you do the calculation on teraflops, you get 9.2. They claim 10.3. But the calculation, just going from 2.23 gigahertz to 2 gigahertz, let's say their GPU is always running at 2 gigahertz. At 36 control units, PlayStation 5's teraflop number becomes 9.2. And that's the number you saw for almost 8 months to 12 months. Is 9.2 is all you saw online. And it got ripped apart. And I think that's why PlayStation went with this overclock theory and variable speeds. Because 9.2 is not a marketable number. 10.3 is, and I'll show you why. So, without assuming numbers, because you really can't with variable speeds on CPU and GPU, there's no real way to compare Xbox Series X to PlayStation 5. Because one's talking about sustained, one's talking about a peak, and we don't know what that lower number is when it's not peaking. So, based on information that has been released by Sony and Xbox, it's you can assume 2 gigahertz on the GPU and do your calculations, and you're going to get a 9.2 sustained number for PlayStation and a 12.1 number on the Xbox. So if you look at next gen consoles compared to PC flagships, you have the PlayStation 5 with its sustained 2 gigahertz GPU at a 9.2 teraflop. You have the Radeon 5700 XT. You have the RTX at 11.11 was it 11.9, and you have Xbox at 12.1, and then you have one of the best GPUs out there, the RTX 2080 Ti at just 16.1 teraflops. So this shows that PlayStation is starting next gen at the end of the line. It almost seems like they created an RDNA 1 machine and then they upgraded it to RDNA 2, and they weren't planning on putting out such a powerful console, and then Xbox just blew them out of the water, and PlayStation was planning on a mid-gen refresh, 1000%. They thought, let's wait a couple of years, parts are going to get cheaper, pieces are going to get cheaper, we're going to come up with a better design, and then we're going to blow Xbox out of the water, and Xbox said, we're already there. And it's very clear to see. So based on this 9.2 teraflop number on the PS5 and the 12.1 number on the Xbox Series X, that's a 44% high difference, 44%. And that's because of a higher control unit count, 52 control units. And it's not something the PS5 can overcome. It simply can't, it won't. They're going to come out with, for sure, they're going to come out with a mid-gen refresh that's going to try to rival the Xbox Series X. And the Xbox is just going to sit back and relax. Microsoft has done this for a long time. The past 2 years that I've had my Xbox One X, it's been the best place to play games, and I have a PS4 Pro. it was the best place to play games because 90% of the great games out there are multi-platform games, and they run better on the Xbox One X. Um, and then you have console exclusives like Forza and Gears of War and all these games running at native 4K 60 frames per second, and there's not really much you can say that PlayStation has to rival that. You can't. Microsoft has had so Microsoft is going for this fine wine approach. And they started with the Xbox One X. They said we got to go power, and they did the 6 teraflops on the Xbox One X, and that's more than enough. 6 to 7 teraflops is what you need to have realistic, native 4K, 60 frames per second, and there's great developers out there that can do that. So optimizing games is hard, and having a static clock with no power fluctuations is always easier to work with than having to optimize games on a dynamic machine like the PS5 where the clocks are fluctuating. But still, next gen consoles are still going to be revolutionary. And if you want to compare consoles and PC flagships, one thing. So, somebody online I saw did a calculation, and what the Series X would be capable of if they varied the clock and it went up and down like the way PlayStation does. And it came out something like this. You have Sony at a sustained 9.2, what they're claiming at 10.3. You have Xbox at 12.1 sustained. And then if you vary the clock, Xbox goes up to a whopping 14.6 teraflops. So it's really hard to compare the two, to be honest with you. Like 16 teraflops or like 14 teraflops is RTX 2080 Ti territory, and that is 1,000. It retails for 1,199 US right now. I live in Canada, so 11.99 US for me seems like a ridiculous price to pay for a GPU. But for $4.99 or $3.99 or whatever these prices on these consoles are going to be, I get that kind of power out of the Xbox Series X. And to be honest with you, if both these consoles come out at the same price, it's like I have a Nintendo Switch, and I hate to bring the Nintendo Switch into this, but if you're gonna sell me a console like the Switch, and it plays Luigi's Mansion or Super Mario or what, Zelda at those graphics, and the games are all geared towards a younger like a younger generation of gamers. I bought it because I got sucked into the hype, but to pay $400, I paid $400 for my Xbox One X. I felt I got ripped off by $200 when I bought the Nintendo Switch. And that's what's gonna happen when I buy a PS5, because I know I will buy a PS5, but I won't buy it first. I'll definitely get the Xbox first, but I'm gonna feel ripped off if I'm paying $3.99 or $4.99 for both. I'm gonna feel like I got ripped off because look what Xbox is giving me, and it just doesn't feel like PlayStation did as much work to come up with as good of a product. So the Xbox Series X with its 12.1 teraflops actually beats out some lower clocked variants of the RTX 2080 Super. This is the first time that a console has been able to take on a PC high-end market, and I think that deserves applause. Part of the reason for this is, you know, the fact that the next gen consoles are built like miniature PCs and the architecture is x86. We even know, even if you throw in the RX 5700 XT in there, and it's roughly equivalent to the Sony PS5's number. See, 57 XT, you're looking at 9.98, and Sony's sustained number is 9.2. So the Radeon 5700 XT has more teraflops. The RTX 2080 Super has 11.9 and Xbox is at 12.1. You'd have to go RTX 2080 Ti custom to get the full 16 teraflops to find a GPU that's better than the Xbox One X. So, this is just looking at architecture based on what Sony and Xbox have released. I'm looking at 8 Zen 2 cores. One has a lower clock and one has a higher clock. They claim a 2.23, clock on the GPU. I don't see how that's possible based on the architecture and the 7 nanometer process that they've used. So when you're thinking about next generation, Xbox becomes the go-to for visuals and performance. 90% of the games, pretty much 90% of the games are multi-platform out there. So for all those games, Xbox is the best place to play those games, hands down. You're going to see better performance and better visuals. Now, I referred to before as Xbox being on Hot Chips 2020, and they provided a deep breakdown on the console right down to each transistor, and Microsoft boasted the power and efficiency level that cannot be matched by the PS5 or most high-end gaming PCs on the same price point. Like I said, the 2080 Ti is a $1,100 to $1,200 GPU video card. So to build that PC, you need minimum $1,500. $1,500 to $2,000 US is pretty much what you're going to be spending on creating something equivalent to the 12 teraflops that the Xbox Series X is going to pump out, and it's going to be priced $399, $499, whatever it is. It's going to be minimum three times the price. So it looks like the Xbox Series X will provide nearly double the resolution advantage over the PS5 with even better performance and frame rates. It's a first for AMD hardware when you're talking about full ray tracing hardware, and Xbox putting out that they're doing 380 gigaраys of ray tracing intersections in game. That's an insane number. It's on par with the RTX 2080, and like I said, $1199 US. And it's because of this hardware that you're going to get realistic lighting on the next generation of games without any performance loss, because the hardware, the shaders run in parallel on the Xbox. That is something to think about. Xbox has dedicated ray tracing hardware and it runs in parallel, you're not losing any performance whatsoever. I don't want to really talk about rumors or anything like that, but I did see some stuff online about, you know, people claiming Xbox is going to lose all this, power and performance and this, that, and that. Take it from me, computer engineer, is 100% not true. So the developers have a choice on Xbox to use DX12 or something else. And DX12 is Microsoft's API. But either way, they're always going to be able to access the full capabilities of the RT cores, ray tracing cores. And where the Xbox really shines, because of everything that I just said, it's in comparison to other games when you have full ray tracing on. So let's say Sony did a reveal on Gran Turismo 7. Looks amazing, Gran Turismo 7. The new Gran Turismo on PS5 features full ray tracing in high resolution. And it does look amazing. But that comes at a cost and compromise with less compute units, 36 on PS5 and 52. And where the cost comes in is clarity and quality of ray tracing. So you're seeing Gran Turismo running at quarter of the resolution, while Xbox Series X released their trailer of Forza 7 or Forza, and that's full. PS5 is running at a quarter of the resolution. Gran Turismo, when you look at the trailer, you're seeing missing detail and polygons as Sony compromises on reflective surfaces to meet the demand of the performance needed to run full ray tracing in high resolution. So this confirms that the PS5 is an RDNA 1 machine upgraded to RDNA 2, but with less capable hardware than the Series X, and that's where you're seeing the major difference. Plus, Sony hasn't confirmed DirectML or VRS, which are efficiency APIs that are built into RDNA 2 technology, and they haven't confirmed that. So Xbox has, and just having DirectML and VRS gives Xbox an 18% power advantage, and once you run the efficiency APIs, that advantage of 18% can go up to 30% at the low end and 50% at the high end. That's a power discrepancy between these two consoles. And so you're gonna see double the pixel count on Series X as compared to PS5. So double the pixel count and clarity on 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second. Again, most games are multi-platform, so if you want to see the best resolution, you want to see the best performance, and you want the best visuals, there's no doubt in this world that Xbox Series X is the console to go play on. But at the end of the day, not everyone's going to get an Xbox Series S. There's a lot of people that have been on PlayStation and they have achievements and they have a history and all that stuff. And they like the exclusives, which is really a preferential thing. So once you put these consoles side by side, CPU, GPU, memory, bandwidth, optical drive, internal storage, expandable storage, You're going to be able to get 2 terabytes with expandable storage on the Xbox Series X. Sony hasn't released anything yet as to what their expansion slots are going to look like. Not to mention, Xbox has Velocity architecture, which has crazy memory bandwidth throughput, and it's very efficient. They've split up the motherboard into two. They put a giant heatsink in the middle, like most PCs. I have a huge PC running right now, and air usually gets sucked in from the top and the bottom, and it gets pushed out the back. But your GPU has a heatsink, your processor has a heatsink, your memory RAM has a heatsink on it, and the air flows through that heatsink and it gets pushed out the back. And all Xbox has done is, change the form factor where the two boards are on either side of a heatsink, and the air gets sucked in and it travels up and it comes out the top. And it's an efficient way to cool something down. PlayStation hasn't talked about it. They haven't done a tear down. They haven't told you what the inside looks like. They haven't told you why it's cooled the way it is. They are very vague on all the details because they're not confident in their product. And they realize that they've totally shit the bed when it comes to creating a product for next gen. And you're going to see a refresh for sure, Sony. Xbox, you're not going to have to see a refresh. 12 teraflops is more than enough. And on top of all that, one of the best perks that I experienced on Xbox just happened on August 18th, actually. So I pay for a PlayStation Network because, I used to pay for it. I don't anymore because I don't have my PS4 Pro anymore. I sold it. But I had PlayStation Network and I have the Xbox Game Pass. And on August 18th, when Flight Simulator released, I got it free on PC, day one. I also get AAA exclusives on Xbox for free. AAA exclusives. That would be the equivalent of me getting God of War for free on the PlayStation Network. I don't think that's ever going to happen, to be honest with you. But Xbox says, here's Forza Horizon, here's Forza 7, here's Gears of War 5. Here's all these games, go. Because it's not about console sales anymore. Especially with next generation, it's not going to be about console sales. Online play with games like Call of Duty, Fortnite, Minecraft. These companies are making way more money than selling consoles ever could. Sure, as a company's Microsoft CEO or whatever, a Sony CEO, if I could sell 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 million consoles, it's extra money in my pocket. But right now they're Microsoft is really making a lot of money online. They're getting games like oh man, what was that game that just came out that I was checking out? It's an online game where you're a pirate and you're on a Sea of Thieves or something like that. There are 10 million people online monthly. And you don't need a console to play it. So with the xCloud, personally, if I had xCloud available to me, I would have never bought a Nintendo Switch. None of those games are tailored or are made for me. I'm a grown person wanting to play grown games, and there's no sports games. There's nothing on there for me My nieces and nephews love coming over and playing with my Nintendo Switch because all the games I have, those Zelda and Super Mario and Luigi's Mansion and this and that, and they love these games. But it's not tailored for me. I think personally the Nintendo Switch sells a lot. There's a lot of kids out there and they love that stuff, and their kids are always on the go, so they love taking it around with them. They get to play it in the car on the way to some place. They play it while they're at some place, and the parents want a couple of minutes to talk with their friends, and they need their kids distracted. They have Nintendo Switches, and I can see why it sells a lot. All my nieces and nephews have a Nintendo Switch, all of them, and I do too. I play it on the train to work. It's a good distractor, but I'm never gonna claim that Nintendo Switch is revolutionary or it's a great console or Nintendo Switch has some of the best games of this generation. They don't. It does not. It does not. Zelda, that like Breath of Fire or whatever it is not one of the best games of this generation. It's insane to say any game on Switch is one of the best games of this generation. It's crazy. This generation of gaming, especially on PC with VR and all these things, I get it. When I play some of these games, I get nostalgic and I love it. That's why I have a Nintendo Switch. But I'm gonna be real about it. I don't think the Switch, regardless of how much it sells, is like any sort of standard bearer or the line that everybody has to go through. But it is what it is. So, thank you for watching this video. I tried to stick to exactly what the companies have revealed and not what the rumors are so much. This is what they revealed. These are the games that they revealed. Xbox coming out and saying the standard is going to be 4K and 60 frames per second. It's clear why they say that, because they know their console can handle that 24/7, always at the same GPU power. It's sustained, and PlayStation 5 can't do it. That's why they say these things. This is slowly starting to jab and raising the level. And Microsoft's being real smart, and everything they've done to this point, you can tell that they've done their homework. The way they designed the console and the way it cools itself down, and they're giving you optimized versions of old games, full backwards compatibility. They've checked every box on this console. Now, PS5 will probably sell more than Xbox Series X, but this generation isn't based on console sales, so it's not going to make a difference. Regardless, like Nintendo Switch probably sells more than Xbox. Doesn't make a difference. No grown man is going to go out and buy a Switch for himself. I bought one. I bought into the hype, and now, like my PlayStation 4, the day I turned on Forza Horizon at full native 4K 60 frames per second, I never turned on my Xbox, my PlayStation 4 after that, or my Nintendo Switch. I sold my PS4. I'm probably going to sell my Switch as well. So I'm the type of gamer that I want the most realistic visuals at the highest frame rates in the smoothness that I can get. And Microsoft is telling me that they want to produce that product, and I'm all in. So based on the architecture, based on the specs, based on what the companies have revealed, it's clear that one is definitely better than the other. Now it's up to the developers to go out there and to produce great games. And based on some of the stuff that I've seen, NHL 21, 2K, you saw Xbox Series did 1 hour on 1 hour streamed in 4K, not Sony's games reveal that was streamed in 720p. You know exactly why they streamed in 720p. You know exactly why they streamed in 720p. Because they didn't want to show you what they're not capable of doing, which is 4K. So Xbox did an hour of 20 plus launch day exclusives, Hellblade, this, that, and the games looked really good. Sony did theirs. They had a couple of nice exclusives in there as well. Like I said, Gran Turismo 7 looked good, and they did a couple of exclusives, and then they talked about multi-platform games and indie games, which once you talk indie games, you're talking Nintendo Switch to me, so I tune out. So yeah, Xbox has got more launch day titles, and they got full backwards compatibility. So how can you argue with that, eh? So let me know. Let me know what you guys think of this. Let me know your thoughts on the next generation. What you see is the trend in terms of what consoles are going to be capable of, and let me know. Are you team green or are you team blue?